Hi, welcome to Simply Muskegon. I'm Debra Brown-Hendrickson, and today we're in a very, very special place in Muskegon, the Muskegon Museum of Art, with the curator, Jane Connell. And we're celebrating the work of a lady who basically broke the mold at China in England many years ago, Claris. And Jane, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
Tell us a little bit about this lady who has done all this fabulous color in here.
Well, Claris was a very, very interesting person. She was much ahead of her time in the early part of the 20th century. She was born in 1899, and at the young age of 13, she went into the ceramic business, or into the potteries, which was very typical for people living in the potteries at that time. When you were raised in the area of England that had the potteries, the pottery factories, it was very typical to go from generation to generation and remain in that business. And so young girls called paintresses were brought into the system at perhaps 13 years old. In Claris's case, she began at 13 and started painting, drawing, being trained in that way. But her interest was so much greater than most of the other girls. She was interested in the whole process. She was interested in sculpting. In fact, she wanted to be a sculptress at the time. And so she began making shapes as well. And all of this contributed a great deal to the development of art pottery, and in particular, British pottery. Now, when we think about British pottery, we probably think of wonderful teapots because we associate drinking tea with England and the area around England. And so we might imagine a lovely pot with small roses all across it. That would be very, very typical. Or a completely plain pot with no decoration at all. Now, to have really wonderful and fine china would not have been available to the people who worked at the potteries, to the working class people, to the middle class people. This was all an upper class and royal kind of work. Claris opened up the potteries and the making of pottery, and of very outstanding pottery, to the common man, to the working class people. And this was phenomenal. And in addition to that, something that really carried out of British pottery into the larger world was the fact that it was painted in bright colors, which was not at all a British thing at the time. And so we were surrounded with these marvelous, marvelous objects.
Okay, now when Claris started doing this, it was about the beginning of World War I believe. And so a lot of the English people would not have had anything in their homes even remotely like this.
That is correct.
And she kind of added in her own stamp on it and made it into what is now a very valuable, very highly collectible thing.
Yes, that's very, very true. World War I, of course, was a very critical time, 1914 to 1918, and then into the 20s and late 20s and early 30s was a period, as in our own country, the period of the Great Depression. And so there was less availability certainly during that time. But Claris and the people at the potteries where she was. So the people at the Royal Staffordshire Potteries where Claris worked, and especially through Claris and her interest, actually were able to overcome the Depression when other potteries were failing. The Royal Staffordshire and Newport potteries succeeded because there was something about Claris and her interest and the association she had developed with the management of the potteries. And she was aware of a whole warehouse full of plain pottery that was not decorated in any way. Just a warehouse full of it. And she asked if she couldn't add some painted designs to these, which she did. She wanted to experiment with that, and she did that, and the Potteries decided, let's see if any of this would sell. Let's take this out to our salespeople and see what happens. And the rest basically is history, because the bright colors, the vivid designs, the fact that these objects were hand painted, even though they were partly manufactured in an industrial product, the fact that they were hand painted objects that were available to working class and common people rather than just upper class and royal persons was something that had not been seen before.
So her designs really carried us right on through the Art Deco era, the Jazz Age, something bright, something uplifting, something very, very fun for people to have in their homes.
Yes.
I just find her a fascinating lady at the time that she lived and the way that she did to pull it all together.
Yes.
And I know that we're going to go over and take a look at some of the work that she has done as sort of a retrospective of her whole career.
Yes, we should take a look. Yes.
By the way, this is part of a very large private collection from a gentleman here in Michigan, and it's my understanding that this may be one of the largest collections of her pottery in the world.
That is correct, and we believe it may be the largest collection in the United States or very close to it, and right here from Michigan. And this exhibition includes 175 objects. It's a great number of works, but they're so colorful and so wonderful. We've had a marvelous turnout of people who are very interested in seeing all this wonderful design.
And this exhibit goes on how long?
The exhibition runs through August 1st, so you have much of the summertime to come see it. And I would strongly advise it because there's a lot of explanatory material, a wonderful brochure to teach you a lot about the Claris Cliff works, but also just 175 fabulous pieces to look at.
One very special item that is not going to be in this show because it's not on display right now is an art piece that is on loan to you from the collectors, I believe, and writers of the book of Claris Cliff, the first book. And it's called a bazooka. And I'm just going to let that out to the audience, and I want them to come into the museum to find the bazooka because you will be amazed by this piece.
It is a wonderful piece, and as soon as we install it, it will be available to everyone to see for most of the summer.
She created it with actual china, but the piece that you have is a mock-up done with, I believe, plywood.
Plywood, painted plywood.
And painted plywood, but this was actually done with real china, and it's something fascinating to see.
Yes, it is. I wanted to start by showing you 3 objects that give us an overview of Claris's work. Now, something that we have to keep in mind, we're talking about Claris designing, Claris painting, but in fact, she did most of the designing herself, but had a whole group of over 100 paintresses, teenagers like she had been, doing all of the painting. Now, Claris was about 28 years old when she really came into her own with this glossed ware, the plain white ware that she was experimenting with, and then having these other paintresses work with her and develop a technique and a sort of a mass production line to accomplish this as quickly as possible, but with the kind of quality that was important for the objects. Now imagine, if you will, that all 3 of these pieces, which are traditional shapes, were perfectly white. There was no decoration on them. And that, almost out of the blue it seems, Claris Cliff designed this particular work, which is something we call original bazaar. And you can understand the name bazaar in that that's exactly what it was. It was something totally phenomenal and newfangled at the time. And so even the title bazaar wares took off. But she started with these very simple, brightly colored geometric forms. And she wanted the brushwork to show. She wanted you to know that they were hand painted because that added to their class, that added to their importance and relating it to things like art pottery of the time that would have been hand decorated. So here is just the simplest piece, but with this dynamic and very bright coloring. The next one was Claris's first design of landscape. It's called Caprice, and you'll notice that she's used these very elaborate, fantastical kinds of trees and a little bridge and hills. And notice, I mean, when have we seen orange trees? She used her imagination. She loved the bright colors. She loved the kind of effect that that would do. So this was her first landscape, and they became very, very popular, as well as the geometric wares, and typically in these wild kinds of colors. The other one, in this wonderful jardiniere, or a planter for pots, this is her crocus design. She developed this in 1928, and it was so popular that it was made all the way until the 1960s. Now, this was a case where she could work with her paintresses in two ways. We have the top and the bottom, which is banded. And actually these were put on a wheel that would turn like a potter's wheel. And they became very good at putting just enough paint on the brush and applying it to the pot as it was spinning to create these very even-handed bands. And then what we call a frieze through the center that could be decorated. This is the crocus pattern, and her paintresses were able to take their brushes and just go 1, 2, 3 in one color, 1, 2, 3 in another color to get the different colors and make the crocus flower. Then turn the pot upside down and make the little green marks for the leaves. And in this way, again, she's able to create a wonderful design that would be very popular with a popular flower, make it easy for the paintresses to develop their hand at actually doing the work and having them hand painted. So this is a kind of summary then, because her geometric wares, her landscapes, and her florals became the epitome of Claris Cliff.
And this just opened it up for people, because I think in terms of British pottery of that era, possibly maybe transferware, the blue willow pattern,
yes.
that kind of, a normal family wouldn't have had anything handmade, hand-painted.
Right. The transferware, right, would have been a kind, just as it says, a kind of a decal that was actually applied to the surface. Nothing hand-painted like this.
Okay, we've got a lot more to look at, and we're going to go through and show you some of the spectacular works from the collection.